Hey, what's going on, guys? Jake Verdon Tech here, back with another video. And today we're going to be putting together the ultimate display slash monitors buyer's guide, especially since right now a lot of the November sales are going on and today is Black Friday. I'm definitely a little bit late to this video, but there's going to be some sales on a lot of monitors and peripherals from now, Cyber Monday, of course, and probably through the end of the month. So in this video, there's a lot of topics I want to cover. And kind of compiling all this when it comes to monitors, there's definitely a lot to consider. So we're going to have a category for core specs. This is going to be things like your resolution when you choose a monitor, the refresh rate, and the different types of panels that are available. So those are kind of the core specs we're going to discuss a little bit, pros and cons. Then the other category of specifications we're going to cover is just what I like to call features. This is going to be things like HDR, G-Sync, FreeSync, kind of the added bonuses on a lot of monitors on the market. This is mostly going to cover monitors, but we might discuss TVs a little bit too. So first things first, guys, kind of when choosing a monitor, I think the biggest thing is to kind of signify what you're going to be using it for. I mean, obviously you're going to be using it to view what's on your device, but more importantly, like what types of content are you going to be viewing? So is the monitor you're shopping for, is it going to be more for work and content creation where color accuracy is really important and the overall image quality? Or is this going to be a first-person shooter competitive type monitor that you're shopping for? So this all really depends kind of what you're looking for and what types of content you're looking to use the monitor for, what types of games you're going to be playing. So the first core spec we're going to talk about is the first spec you're probably going to see when shopping for a monitor, and that is resolution. So resolution basically measures the number of pixels that a monitor will have. And this is measured both in the width of pixels and the height in pixels. So if we take this LG 27-inch Ultra Gear monitor that I recently picked up and we'll talk about, it is 3840 by 2160 or 4K. So it's going to be a width in pixels of 3840 by a height in pixels of 2160. And these monitors are referred to as 4K just because of that horizontal dimension being 3840, which is just rounded up to 4. So people just say 4K when it comes to those dimensions. The other most common resolutions you're going to see is 2560 by 1440, which this is kind of known as Quad HD or 2K resolution. Then the most iconic one, which is standard full HD, which there's still plenty of them out, but we are getting a lot more options into the 2K and 4K ranges just because prices come down a lot and they're just more available now. But 1080p is definitely still relevant, and this is going to be 1920 by 1080 full HD. So now that we've kind of covered the basic resolutions that you'll see most commonly, I just kind of want to go over the use cases for a lot of these. So I would definitely say when you see more 1920 by 1080p monitors these days, it could be just a very basic monitor where it's just 1080p HD, 60 hertz. Some of those will just be kind of a peripheral monitor that just gives you a nice display. In terms of gaming, most of your 1080p monitors are going to be very high refresh rate monitors. So they're designed for competitive first-person shooter gameplay where they're going to have very high refresh rates, low response times to kind of give you the most competitive edge when it comes to different types of competitive titles. Going into the 1440 and 2K range, it's going to kind of be a very well-rounded monitor. It's going to give you some extra resolution from 1920 by 1080. And this can be very beneficial if you are gaming, maybe doing more open world RPG style titles, or if this is a monitor that you are going to do some content creation with, maybe some photo editing, video editing. 1440 is a nice little upgrade in resolution from 1080. Then going into 4K, this is the highest resolution you can really get that's mainstream. When it comes to gaming, I'd say 4K is the best for if you want the most beautiful looking gaming experience, but maybe you sacrifice a little bit when it comes to refresh rate and speed. Although keep in mind these days there is a lot of monitors out there that are really pushing the boundaries and can give you all the features you want, but they come with a heavy premium. And then 4K is obviously going to be very good for content creation if you're editing photos in Photoshop and Lightroom, or doing some type of video editing as well. And of course, just viewing contents like YouTube videos, movies, 4K is going to give you a really sharp experience there as well. So jumping over to the next very popular spec is going to be refresh rate. And this is definitely more catered towards gamers, as you can notice it if you're doing other activities, but it's not something that will affect you or influence your buying decision. So refresh rate is essentially what it sounds like. It is the amount of times that your monitor is going to refresh the image per second, and this is measured in hertz. A lot of times I describe refresh rate as the smoothness. Whenever I drag a window onto a monitor that's very high refresh rate, it's just so smooth because the monitor is refreshing the image so fast, you don't really see the individual frames as much as you would like on a 60 hertz monitor. And it translates in game fantastically. The higher the refresh rate, you will genuinely have a much better gaming experience, just because how smooth and how comfortable it is. In many cases where they've done blind taste tests monitor to monitor, a lot of people have gravitated towards the higher refresh rate monitors that might have a little bit lower resolution, versus the higher resolution 4K monitors that have a lower refresh rate. And touching on refresh rate versus frames per second, or FPS, this is something that's really gotten confused over the years for a lot of people that are just getting into the new generation of console gaming, or just getting into PC gaming for the first time. So as we mentioned, refresh rate is the amount of times your monitor or display is refreshing per second, measured in hertz. When talking about frames per second, or FPS, this is on the device side. So this is going to be the output of your PC or console, and how many frames of the content you're viewing that it's putting out per second. So these definitely go hand in hand when you're talking about frames per second on the device side and refresh rate when it comes to the display side. And this is how. So let's take a PC, and with a particular game that is putting out 120 frames per second on average. In order to visually see that 120 frames per second, you're going to need a monitor that's at least 120 hertz. Because if you have anything lower, the monitor is not going to refresh fast enough to visually represent those frames that are being output by your device. So if you had a 60 hertz monitor, you would only be seeing about 60 of those frames per second being put out. Which this isn't bad, but it's not ideal because there's a lot of performance being left on the table by your PC, and you're not really reaping the benefits of having those higher frames per second. So as I mentioned, the higher refresh rate monitors are definitely going to be geared more towards the FPS competitive gamers, while the lower refresh rates are going to be more geared towards anybody that's just viewing content on YouTube, movies, editing videos and photos. In the mid-range, talking about anything between 100 hertz to 165 hertz can be a good all-around, really smooth experience when just working on your PC, or really good gaming experience too, giving you that extra smoothness. So next we're going to talk about the different panel types. So this is kind of the composition of the panel and how it's getting the image generated. In the monitor space, there's 4 key players, I would say. So one's going to be TN, the other is going to be VA, IPS, and OLED. So running through these real quick, TN is going to be a little bit older style of a panel. You still see them around, and they're typically in very high refresh rate competitive style monitors. So kind of the drawbacks with TN is going to be viewing angles. If you're not looking directly at the monitor, you're kind of going to get a haze if you're looking off to it from the sides. TN is really favored by competitive gamers too, just from its very low response time and latency, which definitely makes up for the poor viewing angles. VA panels kind of stand in between the TN and IPS options. VA supports per pixel dimming, provides a little bit better contrast in images, and it comes with better viewing angles compared to TN, where the drawback is the higher response times versus TN, and the color accuracy isn't typically going to be as good as what you get on an IPS. IPS, in my opinion, has become kind of the best all-around panel with the advancements they've made in it. IPS is going to provide the best color accuracy, the best brightness, and viewing angle performance compared to what TN and VA provide. And the drawback has really just been the response time, but with a lot of the latest gaming panels, they've been able to get the response time very low on certain IPS panels. And for the fourth monitor type, I don't have one in my setup right now, but I want to quickly mention OLED, as it is probably the monitor type or the display type that really blows everything else out of the water when it comes to image quality, but can have some drawbacks when it comes to price and the longevity of these displays, with pixel burn-in being a factor. Going over the features, so this is the part where I wouldn't say these should make or break your monitor purchase. These are just kind of added bonuses to a lot of monitors and displays you'll see on the market. One is G-Sync and FreeSync. This is a technology in the monitors that will allow the refresh rate to match the frames per second to prevent any sort of artifacting like screen tearing being most common, and other sorts of artifacting to give you a better gaming experience. Between NVIDIA G-Sync and AMD FreeSync, they achieve the same goal, but NVIDIA does it more in a hardware fashion where there's a chip soldered onto the internals of monitors that allow this feature, when AMD FreeSync is more on the firmware side. From what I've heard, NVIDIA graphics cards can be compatible with AMD FreeSync devices, so you can still get those added benefits. Another feature is HDR, which this is another feature that isn't necessarily a make or break option for your purchase, but HDR is high dynamic range, and essentially this will improve image quality and allow higher contrast ratios in your images. But I'm always very leery of this one because not everything supports HDR, and not every content, whether it's a video, a game, not everything is HDR compatible. So I would definitely keep that in mind. The last feature, which I would definitely recommend for future proofing, and if you are on a device that supports this, is HDMI 2.1. So this is a hardware improvement we're seeing on more and more displays, where HDMI is onto the next version, being 2.1, and this allows an increased bandwidth of HDMI. And instead of allowing 4K 60 to be the max pass-through of HDMI 2.0, HDMI 2.1 does allow 4K 120 FPS to pass through. And this was something we never really had to consider on the PC side because DisplayPort's most commonly used, and its bandwidth caps far exceed the typical use cases. So if you are upgrading your display and you have a next or current gen console like a PS5 or Series X, I would definitely recommend make sure the monitor that you're purchasing or the TV that you're purchasing. So for the titles that do support a higher FPS, like 120 FPS at 4K, you'll be able to utilize that with one of these monitors. Since we ended the features, just kind of my final recommendations when you are shopping for a monitor, and some that I have in my setup. Going back to use case, I'd say if you are looking for probably the best all-around monitor that has a reasonable resolution, refresh rate, I think anywhere in the 1440 range is really good. That was something that maybe is around 100 hertz and up, I think you'll have a really good experience. If you're maybe playing more open world, kind of want the most immersion, I would go anywhere from a 1440p monitor to 4K, and consider the refresh rate and response time kind of as a secondary feature. I wouldn't prioritize those as much, even though I do recommend having at least 100 hertz refresh rate or just a smoother experience. If you're looking for a sweaty FPS competitive gaming setup, I'd recommend any 1080p 24 to 27 inch monitor that has a high refresh rate, anything probably above 165 hertz, favorably 240. I think that's a good sweet spot with a 1 millisecond response time, so your inputs are as fast as they can be. There's a lot of enthusiast monitors out there that go above the 240 hertz refresh rate. They go up to 360. I think I've even seen one around 500 right now. I would completely ignore those monitors because there are very few systems and very few games that'll let you get 360 plus FPS. Another thing is ultrawides. Personally, I love an ultrawide monitor if it is kind of the core display in your setup. They provide really good space for productivity and then can give you a little bit increased level of immersion in games. I think 34 to 38 inch ultrawides are kind of a sweet spot when you get into that category of monitors. My personal opinion, I would not opt for any of the 49 inch offerings like the ones from Samsung, and I think Asus has one out now. And this is for a couple reasons. One being, it's just kind of impractical viewing angles. It gets very wide for the distance that you're going to be sitting from it in most setups. And the other reason is just the amount of graphics power you're going to need to drive that many pixels in your setup. And transitioning into monitor size and pixels, another very important thing to talk about is PPI, or pixels per inch. So this is dealing with pixel density, and basically you just don't want a monitor that exceeds the amount of resolution that it offers. So what I mean by that is you don't want a giant monitor that has a low resolution and the pixels are kind of stretched out and your image looks very soft and not very sharp. I would recommend anywhere between 100 and 140 pixels per inch, and making it more applicable, I think any 1080p monitors, I wouldn't go above like a 27-inch monitor in 1080p. In 1440, I probably wouldn't go anywhere over the 34-inch mark. In 4K, you can usually get away with anything above that and get a great image. So that is it for this video, guys. Thank you for checking this one out. I hope you guys found it helpful. I know it's a little late to the party when it comes to the sales going on right now, but between now and Cyber Monday and the end of the month, these deals will probably stick around on a lot of these monitors as they're trying to move them out for new inventory next year. And these are overall really good products on the market. I really don't think there's too many like bad ones to completely steer away from. I will have some of the monitors that I use and some of the ones I would recommend listed below to kind of give you guys an idea and to check them out for yourselves. It can be kind of daunting when purchasing a display with all these specs and features that are available, but I think the biggest thing is just identifying what you're going to be using the monitor for and kind of picking one that best fits that scenario. If you guys enjoyed this video and found it helpful, make sure to drop a like on it, and if you want to see more tech related videos like this one, be sure to subscribe. As always, guys, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.